The crystalline bridges of the Confederation flagship, Unity's Dawn, sparkled with celebration lights that danced across every surface like captured starlight. Admiral Kexhal of the Relithian Command stood at the center of the massive command deck, his forearms spread wide in triumph as holographic displays showed the scattered remains of the Void Swarm fleet across 3 star systems. Twisted metal and dark organic matter drifted through space, like the bones of some ancient nightmare finally put to rest. "Today we have achieved what many thought impossible," his voice boomed across the combined fleet of 12 species, transmitted to every ship in the massive armada. "The Void Swarm has been defeated. The galaxy is safe." The roar of celebration that followed could have shattered mountains. Across the Altarian heavy cruisers, crews of blue-skinned warriors raised their rai, plasma rifles in salute. On the sleek Vectari science vessels, the insectoid researchers clicked their mandibles in rhythmic approval that sounded like cosmic rain. Even the usually stoic Nomani battle monks aboard their fortress ships allowed themselves brief smiles. Behind their ceremonial masks, the victory had cost them everything they had and more. Entire fleets reduced to glowing debris fields that would drift through space for millennia. Colonies evacuated in desperate panic as the swarm consumed world after world, leaving behind only dead rock stripped of all life. Billions displaced, families torn apart, civilizations pushed to the very edge of extinction. The Kepler Station massacre still haunted everyone's dreams, 50,000 souls consumed in minutes by creatures that turned living flesh into more of themselves. But they had won. Against impossible odds, the combined might of the galaxy had turned back the tide of darkness that threatened to devour everything they held dear. Captain Yoon of the Terran liaison vessel, Soul's Light, remained silent at his station on the Bridges observation deck. His weathered face showed none of the joy that filled the other officers around him. Earth had been quiet for 3 years, ever since they had politely requested time to prepare an adequate response to the threat, and then simply vanished from all galactic communications. Most species assumed humanity, being the newest and seemingly weakest member of the Confederation, simply couldn't match the technological advancement needed for such a devastating war. The humans had always been odd. They fought with primitive, kinetic weapons when others used plasma. They relied on raw determination when others had evolved beyond such messy emotions. During the first swarm attacks on the Outer Rim colonies, human volunteers had thrown themselves at creatures that could slice through battle armor like paper, buying time for evacuations with nothing but crude explosives and stubborn courage. "Strange," murmured Communications Officer Kim as she leaned over her sensor array, her fingers dancing across holographic controls that painted her face in blue light. "I'm detecting massive energy signatures approaching from the Sol system." Captain Yoon's expression darkened like a storm cloud gathering strength. Something cold settled in his stomach as he watched the young officer's face grow pale. "How many ships?" "Sir, I count 57 vessels. But these readings—" She paused, her voice catching in her throat as the numbers scrolled across her screen. "These aren't matching any known human ship configurations in our database. The energy signatures are completely different from anything we've seen before." The sensors painted a picture that made no sense. The approaching vessels were massive, some larger than Confederation Dreadnoughts, but they moved through space without the usual energy emissions that marked faster-than-light travel. No plasma wake, no dimensional rifts, no tachyon trails. They simply appeared to glide through the void like ghosts made of metal and shadow. Through the massive viewports that lined the command deck, the celebration continued in full swing. Fireworks burst between the ships in brilliant displays of color that painted the hulls of vessels from a dozen worlds. The Zephyrian cloud dancers performed their victory spirals, leaving trails of luminescent gas that spelled out words of triumph in languages both ancient and new. Medical ships moved between the battle-scarred vessels like gentle giants, their healing beams already working to repair the damage from the final battle. But Captain Yoon couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The silence from Earth had been too complete, too absolute. No distress calls, no requests for aid, no reports of swarm attacks on human colonies. It was as if humanity had simply chosen to disappear from the galaxy at the moment when they were needed most. The sensor readings grew stronger by the minute. Whatever was approaching from Sul carried power signatures that dwarfed even the mighty Confederation flagship. The energy patterns were alien in a way that made experienced spacers nervous. Not the familiar alien of their allied species, but something else entirely. Something that had learned to speak in frequencies that normal ships weren't designed to understand. In the depths of space, something vast and wrong was approaching the celebration, and Captain Yoon had the horrible feeling that the real war was just about to begin. The first Earth dreadnought materialized from hyperspace like a wound torn in the fabric of reality itself. Space seemed to bleed darkness as the massive vessel emerged, its arrival marked not by the usual flash of light that accompanied faster-than-light travel, but by an absence of light that made nearby stars appear dimmer. The HDES Taeguk was a monstrosity that defied every principle of ship design known to the galaxy, 3 kilometers of vessel that merged dark metal with organic curves in ways that hurt to look at directly. The ship seemed alive. Its hull pulsed with veins of bioluminescent material that glowed with sickly green light, while sections of its armor appeared to breathe like the skin of some massive creature. Gun ports opened and closed like eyes blinking, and the entire vessel radiated an aura of wrongness that made even hardened space marines reach for weapons they knew would be useless. 56 more vessels followed in perfect formation, each one a hybrid of human engineering and something else entirely. Some were sleek predators that moved through space like hunting sharks, their hulls covered in what looked like scales that shifted color in the starlight. Others were massive and bulky, covered in organic armor that seemed to grow and repair itself even as they watched. A few resembled nothing so much as flying cathedrals of bone and metal, their spires reaching out into space like the ribs of some cosmic beast. The celebration aboard the Confederation fleet died like a candle snuffed out by hurricane winds. Klaxons fell silent mid-wail. Fireworks fizzled and died. The joyous chatter across communication channels became a stunned silence as sensors struggled to process what they were seeing. Bridge crews across the fleet stared at their displays in disbelief, running diagnostic after diagnostic, convinced their equipment had malfunctioned. The ships were wrong in every possible way. They moved through space without the telltale energy, signatures that marked conventional propulsion systems. No plasma drives, no antimatter reactions, no dimensional fold engines. They simply glided forward like ghosts made manifest, their passage marked only by the way light seemed to bend around their hulls. Where normal ships hummed with the constant background noise of life support systems and reactor cores, these vessels were eerily silent. Even their communication arrays operated on frequencies that barely registered on standard equipment. Most disturbing of all, the ships showed no battle damage, despite humanity's 3-year absence during the most devastating war in galactic history. Their hulls were smooth and unmarked, as if they had never seen combat, or as if they had evolved beyond the need to fear conventional weapons. Confederation Fleet, this is Captain Lee of the Human Defense Force, came a voice over the communication channels. The transmission was crystal clear, cutting through the background static that usually plagued long-range communications. But there was something fundamentally off about it. The words were too precise, the tone too controlled, as if the speaker was carefully measuring each syllable before speaking it. "We received word that the celebration started without us, Admiral." Kexhal's 4 eyes widened as he stared at the tactical display, watching the impossible energy readings scroll across his screens. His usually steady hands trembled as he activated his personal communicator, his voice carrying across the fleet's command frequency. "Captain Lee, where has Earth been for the past 3 years? We attempted contact multiple times through standard, diplomatic channels and emergency frequencies." A pause that lasted far too long stretched across the void. In that silence, bridge crews across the fleet could hear their own heartbeats thundering in their ears. The human dreadnoughts continued their approach, their dark forms growing larger against the star field with each passing second. "We were busy learning from our guests, Admiral," Captain Lee finally replied, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate through the ship hulls themselves. The void swarm taught us many interesting things about the nature of survival and adaptation. The bridge of Unity's dawn fell into absolute silence. Every officer present felt ice form in their veins as the implications of those words sank in. Every species in the Confederation knew the terrible truth about the Void Swarm. No one had ever successfully captured their entities alive. The creatures would rather trigger massive self-destruct sequences that could vaporize entire star systems than allow themselves to be studied. The few attempts to take swarm specimens had resulted in disasters that were still classified at the highest levels of galactic security. Guests? Admiral Kexhal's voice cracked slightly, his usual commanding presence wavering as he processed what he was hearing. Around him, his bridge crew began backing away from their stations, their survival instincts screaming warnings that their rational minds couldn't yet accept. "We'll be joining your victory celebration shortly," Captain Lee replied. "And now there," was something else in his voice, an undertone that sounded like whispers in a language that predated civilized speech. "We have so much to share about what we've learned during our time away from the galaxy." The human dreadnoughts began moving forward with purpose, their dark hulls casting shadows across the Confederation fleet that seemed far too deep and too long for the available starlight. As they approached, sensitive crew members across multiple species began reporting headaches, nightmares while awake, and the persistent feeling that something vast and hungry was watching them from the depths of space itself. 3 years earlier, the corridors of Ganymede Research Station hummed with an energy that had nothing to do with the fusion reactors buried deep in Jupiter's moon. Dr. Park stood before the containment unit in Laboratory 7, his weathered reflection staring back at him from the reinforced transparent aluminum that was strong enough to withstand a direct hit from a plasma cannon. Inside the chamber, suspended in a field of crackling energy, the Void Swarm entity writhed like a living nightmare given form. The creature had once been part of a Confederation scout ship crew, a Vekthari engineer named Zilthak, who had volunteered for a deep space reconnaissance mission. Now it was something else entirely. The swarm infection had transformed the insectoid being into a mass of biomechanical horror that pulsed with its own dark light. Metallic tendrils grew from what had once been arms, weaving through organic tissue that shifted between solid matter and something that looked like living shadow. Its compound eyes had been replaced by clusters of sensors that glowed with malevolent intelligence. "The preliminary dissections are complete," reported Dr. Choi, her voice steady despite the months of horror they had been studying in the deepest levels of the research station. She stood at her workstation, surrounded by holographic displays, showing molecular structures that defied every law of physics known to science. "The symbiosis between organic tissue and dark energy is unlike anything we've encountered in 40 years of xenobiology research." The data was terrifying in its implications. The Void Swarm didn't just kill their victims, they transformed them. The infection process rewrote DNA at the quantum level, replacing natural biological functions with something that fed directly on the dark matter that filled the spaces between stars. The infected became living weapons that could survive in the vacuum of space, regenerate from almost any injury, and communicate across vast distances through methods that bypassed conventional physics entirely. Dr. Park nodded grimly as he studied the readouts. While the galaxy fought the swarm conventionally, throwing ships and soldiers into battles that consumed entire star systems, Earth had chosen a different path. When the first swarm creatures had attacked the mining colony on Titan, the human response had been swift and decisive. Instead of simply destroying the infected colonists, they had captured them. They had studied them. They had learned from them. The official report stated that all infected personnel had been eliminated to prevent the spread of contamination. The reality was far darker. Deep beneath Ganymede's ice, in laboratories that officially didn't exist, humanity's greatest minds had spent 3 years unlocking the secrets of their enemy. "Status on Project Taeguk?" Dr. Park asked, though he dreaded the answer. The project was named after the symbol on South Korea's flag, the balance between opposing forces, light and dark, creation and destruction. It seemed fitting for what they were attempting. "The first volunteer crews are ready," Dr. Choi replied, though her hands trembled slightly as she accessed the classified files. The symbiosis process will be irreversible. Once the integration begins, there's no way to separate the human consciousness from the swarm technology. They'll be changed forever. Through the observation deck's reinforced windows, the first human dreadnought hung in space like a sleeping leviathan against the backdrop of Jupiter's swirling storms. The HDES Taeguk was a monument to humanity's willingness to sacrifice everything for survival. Its hull bore the scars of construction, sections that were clearly human technology welded to other parts that had been grown rather than built. Organic conduits pulsed with dark energy alongside conventional power cables. Weapon systems that looked like metallic flowers opened and closed in rhythm with some alien heartbeat. The ship was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, a fusion of human engineering and swarm biotechnology that represented either the next step in human evolution or the end of humanity as they knew it. "Begin integration," Dr. Park ordered, his voice heavy with the weight of what they were about to do. "If we're going to protect the galaxy, we need to become what they fear most. We need to speak their language, understand their weaknesses, and turn their own weapons against them." The volunteers stepped forward from the shadows of the observation deck. Captain Lee led them, his face calm despite knowing what awaited him. In the symbiosis chambers. Behind him came 56 other crew members who had volunteered for the most dangerous assignment in human history. They were pilots, engineers, weapons specialists, and scientists. The best humanity had to offer, willing to sacrifice their very nature for the greater good. The symbiosis chambers were works of art and horror combined. Each one resembled a metallic cocoon lined with organic material that pulsed with its own life. Swarm technology had been carefully integrated with human medical equipment, creating devices that could rewrite a person's biology at the cellular level while keeping their consciousness intact. Captain Lee entered the first chamber without hesitation. The organic walls closed around him like a living embrace as needles and tendrils made contact with his skin. The process began with a sensation like ice water flooding his veins, followed by pain beyond description as alien technology rewrote his DNA strand by strand. When the volunteers emerged 6 months later, they were no longer entirely human. Their eyes held depths that human eyes were never meant to contain, galaxies of darkness that reflected the void between stars. They moved with perfect coordination, as if they shared a single mind spread across multiple bodies. When they spoke, harmonics in their voices suggested they were communicating on levels that normal humans couldn't perceive. The process had worked beyond their wildest dreams and worst nightmares. Humanity had found a way to bond with void swarm technology, to harness the power that had made their enemies nearly invincible. But the price was their humanity itself, traded away in the name of protecting a galaxy that would never know what they had sacrificed. The real void swarm arrived like a plague of living nightmares made manifest in the cold depths of space. They didn't emerge from hyperspace like normal ships. Instead, reality seemed to tear open like infected wounds, bleeding darkness as thousands upon thousands of biomechanical horrors poured through dimensional rifts that shouldn't have been possible to create. Their forms writhed and twisted through space in formations that hurt to look at directly, as if the human eye wasn't designed to process their alien geometry. The fleet that had terrorized the galaxy for years, consuming entire worlds and turning civilizations into fuel for their endless hunger, had been merely scouts. Advanced reconnaissance forces testing the galaxy's defenses and mapping its weaknesses. This was the true invasion force, a living armada that stretched across light years of space like a cosmic infection spreading through the void. Each swarm vessel was unique in its horror. Some resembled massive jellyfish made of metal and bone, their translucent bodies pulsing with veins of dark energy that crackled between organic components. Others looked like predatory fish the size of moons, their jaws lined with weapon systems that glowed like infected teeth. The largest ships defied description entirely, living cities of flesh and machinery that spawned smaller vessels like a diseased organism shedding spores into the vacuum. Confederation ships opened fire immediately, their weapons lighting up. The void with streams of plasma and antimatter, that painted space in brilliant colors. The combined firepower of 12 species unleashed everything they had: particle beams that could crack planets, kinetic projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed, and exotic weapons that manipulated the fundamental forces of reality itself. Energy beams struck the swarm vessels, carving glowing wounds in their organic armor that sealed themselves within seconds. Kinetic projectiles punched through their hulls only to be absorbed and converted into raw material for rapid regeneration. Even the most advanced weapons of galactic civilization seemed to barely scratch their targets. For every ship destroyed in brilliant explosions of biomechanical debris, 2 more emerged from the writhing mass of the main fleet, like antibodies responding to infection. "All ships, evasive maneuvers," Admiral Kexhal commanded from the bridge of Unity's dawn, his forearms dancing across tactical displays as he watched his fleet's coordinated attack dissolve into chaos. "Pattern delta formations, focus fire on the smaller vessels." But it was too late. The swarm had learned from 3 years of warfare, adapting their tactics with each engagement. Bio-torpedoes the size of buildings launched from organic weapon pods, each one a living missile that tracked its target with predatory intelligence. They struck Confederation hulls with devastating impact, their living payloads burrowing through armor plating like parasites, seeking the soft flesh beneath. The Altarian heavy cruiser, Storm's Edge, took a direct hit amidships, its hull splitting, open like a ripe fruit as swarm organisms poured into its corridors. Emergency broadcasts filled the communication channels with screams and weapons fire, as the crew fought a losing battle against creatures that could survive in vacuum and regenerate from seemingly fatal injuries. A Vecthari science vessel tried to retreat, its insectoid crew abandoning their research in favor of survival. But the swarm had evolved countermeasures for every escape attempt. Tendrils of dark energy reached across space, like grasping fingers, wrapping around the fleeing ship and dragging it back into the mass of writhing vessels where it disappeared without even leaving debris. Then, the human dreadnoughts moved forward. They advanced through the battlefield like sharks swimming through blood, their dark hulls unmarked by the energy weapons that had proven useless against swarm bioarmor. The HDES Teguk led the formation, Captain Lee's transformed crew working in perfect harmony as they guided their impossible vessel deeper into the heart of the invasion force. Captain Lee's voice came over all frequencies, transmitted on wavelengths that normal human vocal cords should never have been able to produce. But now there was something else speaking with him, a harmony of voices that included sounds no human throat could make, frequencies that resonated through subspace itself and made reality shiver like a struck bell. "Confederation fleet, withdraw. To minimum safe distance," the combined voice commanded, carrying overtones that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to the primitive survival instincts buried in every sapient mind. "We will handle this threat. Do not interfere with what comes next." The HDES Teguk and her 56 sister ships advanced into the swarm formation without firing a single weapon. Instead, they began to sing, a sound that started as barely audible harmonics, but quickly grew into something that could be felt in the bones of every living creature within 100,000 kilometers. The song was hauntingly beautiful and absolutely terrifying, like hearing the voice of creation itself twisted into something dark and hungry. The effect on the void swarm was immediate and impossible. Ships that had been advancing in perfect, predatory formation suddenly stopped their attack, their biomechanical systems falling silent, as if someone had thrown a switch. Some began turning on their own kind, organic weapon systems targeting former allies with the same ruthless efficiency they had shown against Confederation forces. Others simply went dormant, floating dead in space like massive corpses drifting on cosmic currents. "Impossible," whispered Admiral Kexhal as he watched humanity's dark fleet carve through the invasion force, not with superior firepower, but with some form of communication that spoke directly to the swarm's hive mind. His tactical displays showed readings that made no sense. The human ships were somehow interfacing with swarm control systems, overriding their programming and turning their own biological imperatives against them. Captain Lee's face appeared on the main screen, transmitted from the bridge of the HFY. His features were still recognizably human, but his eyes held galaxies of darkness that seemed to swirl with their own internal light. When he spoke, shadows moved across his skin like living tattoos that shifted with each word. "We learned their language, Admiral," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the bridge crew of Unity's Dawn take involuntary steps backward. "During our 3 years of study, we learned to speak with the darkness itself. We became fluent in the tongue of extinction." The void swarm retreated like a tide of living nightmares, pulling back into the abyss that had spawned them. Their massive invasion fleet, which moments before had seemed unstoppable in its hunger to consume all life in the galaxy, now fled in disarray toward the deep black between galaxies. Ships that had terrorized entire star systems for years limped away with their biomechanical hulls, damaged not by weapons, but by something far more devastating: betrayal by their own nature. The retreat was unlike anything the Confederation forces had ever witnessed. Swarm vessels that had fought with coordinated perfection suddenly turned chaotic, their hive mind fractured by whatever dark communion the human dreadnoughts had established. Some ships simply shut down mid-flight, drifting like dead whales in the cosmic void. Others cannibalized their own fleet, organic weapon systems turning on former allies with mechanical precision. The largest vessels, those living cities of flesh and machinery, began to consume themselves from within as their biological components rebelled against their programming. The threat that had nearly consumed the galaxy was gone, turned back not by superior firepower or brilliant tactics, but by humanity's impossible communion with their enemy. Earth's dreadnoughts had done what no conventional military force could accomplish. They had spoken to the darkness in its own language and convinced it to devour itself. But as the human fleet prepared to depart, Admiral Kexhal realized with growing horror the true cost of their salvation. The readings from his sensor arrays painted a picture that made his 4 hearts skip beats in sequence. The human ships weren't just leaving, they were changing, their energy signatures shifting toward frequencies that existed outside normal spacetime. "Captain Lee," he transmitted to the HFY, his voice carrying across the void with desperate urgency. "Will Earth be rejoining the Confederation? The galaxy owes humanity a debt we can never repay. Your sacrifice has saved billions of lives across thousands of worlds." The response came from all 57 human ships simultaneously, a chorus of voices harmonizing in ways that made seasoned spacers across the fleet weep without understanding why. The sound bypassed rational thought and spoke directly to something deeper, the part of every sapient mind that recognized when it was in the presence of something that had transcended the normal boundaries of existence. "Earth is no longer part of your galaxy, Admiral," the voices replied, each word resonating through subspace with harmonics that made reality itself seem fragile. "We have become something else to protect what we chose to protect. The void swarm will not return to threaten your worlds. We have made certain of that through bonds that cannot be broken. But we cannot return to what we were either." Through the massive viewports of ships across the Confederation fleet, crews watched in stunned silence as the human dreadnoughts began to fade. They weren't moving away through conventional space. Instead, they were becoming less real, as if they were traveling to dimensions that existed parallel to normal reality. Their dark hulls grew translucent, revealing glimpses of impossible geometries within their structures, where human technology had merged with something that predated the birth of stars. The HFY led the ethereal procession, Captain Lee's, transformed vessel serving as a bridge between the world of matter and energy that the Confederation knew and the realm of pure thought and dark matter that the humans now inhabited. Around it, the other dreadnoughts flickered like candles in a cosmic wind, their biomechanical components pulsing with light that existed in spectrums beyond normal perception. "We were human once," came Captain Lee's final transmission, his voice now layered with harmonics that suggested he was speaking from multiple dimensions simultaneously. "We gave that up so you could remain what you are. We chose to become monsters so that you could continue to be heroes. Remember us as we were, not as we became necessary to become." The last clear image transmitted from the human flagship showed Captain Lee on his bridge, surrounded by crew members who had undergone the same transformation. His face was now more shadow than flesh, his features shifting between human and something else entirely. His eyes held the deep cold of the void itself, containing galaxies of darkness that seemed to swirl with their own internal storms. But when he smiled, and he did smile in those final moments, it was somehow still recognizably human, carrying all the warmth and determination that had defined his species for millennia. "The galaxy is safe," he said, his words carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Your children will grow up in worlds free from the hunger that devours stars. Your civilizations will flourish without fear of creatures that feed on hope itself. That's all that matters to us now." The human dreadnoughts completed their transition, vanishing from normal space-time as they returned to whatever dark realm they now called home. They left behind only empty coordinates and sensor ghosts, echoes of energy signatures that would puzzle xenoarchaeologists for generations to come. The Confederation fleet remained alone among the stars, surrounded by the debris of victory and the silence of space. They had been saved by a species that had chosen to sacrifice their very nature, rather than let others face the darkness that lived in the spaces between worlds. Earth's star burned bright and distant in the cosmic background, but no ship would ever reach it again. The planet had been quarantined not by hostile forces, but by humanity's own transformation into something that could no longer coexist with normal matter and energy. They had become legend, the species that saved the galaxy by becoming the very thing they had fought against. The price of victory had been their souls, and they had paid it gladly, leaving behind a universe where children could sleep safely, under alien stars, never knowing that their dreams were protected by guardians who danced with darkness itself. The end